Oh man. Let me adjust this because my mic, I can tell it's a little low. That's better. Now it's more normal. How's everybody doing tonight? Hmm? Hmm? Oh man. I am in like the crunch week. Interesting. So the usual we'll babble about some nonsensical stuff for a few minutes and then we'll get into topic. Uh Last Saturday? Yeah, Saturday. The 12th. For those that don't know, that was this boy's third birthday. He's now 3. It's almost wild to think that this little guy is 3 years old. But he was happy as a clam day before he got groomed. Uh, my mom was in town for like a single day. she she was picking up new glasses. Apparently, like to get the kind of glasses she needs, she has to come to this side of the state. Uh, or or something. I'm not really sure the exact details why, but she got new glasses over here, so she had to come pick them up now that they were ready. So she was over here for basically a day. So she was here during the boy's birthday, which made him quite excited. He loves grandma something fierce. Although I don't think he knows how to contain that excitement around my mom. Oh man. Let's see what else we do. So I'm in like the death week at work. That's gonna be fun. Too many things and all lined up at the same time, so like I'm excessively busy. What else is new, right? It's kind of something I'm oddly used to in the career I work in. Just everything in the plans like this will be great. It won't be too bad. Nothing ever goes according to plan. It's always a stressful nightmare. um. Okay, so we can talk about a couple things. Ooh, here we go. Here's a good one. I have Kingfisher's Catch. We'll just get right into this. I now have Kalitawa, Myrasai, and Species Lobo, all of which I'm certain Wim and Gary Lang have collected. Unfortunately, I don't have the space to breed all at once, but shall endeavor to do so over time. So, what's important to know is that uh, two of those species literally live in the exact same water system. Myrasai lives in a different system, but Kalitawa and species Lobo were caught in the same spot along with the Langaru, right? Because they're in the Langaru region, and the village it was nearest to them, they've kind of nicknamed Lobo. So you actually have two of those fish actually do live together in the wild, and they do not hybridize. I can English. So they have figured out something in their wild water system where they don't hybridize, despite both being Melantanias, and in most aquariums they will. So there's some interesting stuff there. Okay, uh, Leo, I'll get your question after the topic because I think we've given enough time to dive into topic at this point. All you need to know about filter maintenance on a live stream, which means I'm not using props, right? Why now? I maintained a lot of filters last night. I did work on 5 filters. Yeah, 5 filters, and not all of them are hot rodded. Some of them are. So I had a couple sponge filters I had to clean out, and then I had to do some maintenance on my Awaze canister that's on the 75-gallon long. And then I did maintenance on a Tidal 110 and an Aquaclear 110. And I still have more to do, by the way. I have more filters I need to mess with. But I did a bunch of filter maintenance, and I was thinking to myself, you know, there's a lot of bad information or excessively paranoid information out there about filter maintenance. So let's talk about some of that stuff. With your hang on backs, right? The way that you're going to maintain them is different than your canister filters. And they're going to be even different than a canister filter that has some kind of like pre-filter sponge or intake sponge, you're going to treat all of these a little different. Just like a hang-on back with an intake sponge, you will maintain differently than a hang-on back without an intake sponge. And straight sponge filters, you're gonna clean those completely different than everything else. And yet, despite the fact that you will do service differently on all of these different setups in some way, shape, or form, they're also exactly the same. Confusing, right? Right? So let's talk about what's exactly the same. You're gonna basically, your job is to get all the gunk out of all your media, right? So in most power filters, as we call it, so either canisters, you can kind of include subs, but subs are like their own special animal, and hang-on backs, there's kind of two different ways you'll do maintenance. Quick maintenance, where all you're doing is cleaning like any of your sponges that you've got, whether it's an intake sponge, the sponge internal to the canister, or hang-on back rather, and then usually lightly rinsing out any of the media you have in there. Right? And then there's the kind of full clean, where you're going to take the physical unit completely off the tank, and you're going to work on cleaning the impeller out. You're going to make sure that you get as much like excess gunk from all over the inside of that filter and your intakes and all that kind of stuff to make sure it's super clean. Do you need to do that level of cleaning every time? No. Do some people go to that level every time they service their filter? Yes. Why? For some people, it's a level of like, they don't see it as being clean unless they've cleaned the whole thing. For other people, it's, well, this one time I heard this thing, or this thing happened to me, and the pump stopped working. So now I always clean everything. Now, for folks like me, I very frequently only clean the media unless I've like really gotten lazy on my service. But one thing that I will keep in mind here is that there's a big paranoia typically whenever we're servicing our filters of always use old tank water, right? Use a Ziploc bag or a gallon bag and bag up your sponge filter or bag up your media in old tank water and squeeze it out and then dump that water somewhere else. Don't use tap water. No, don't do it. That's not what I do. Why? There is a great video out there from Primetime Aquatics. In fact, it's so good I want to actually go find it for you. If I was better prepared, here it is. I would have had this ready, but work and stuff. I'm gonna link this, and there are several people who do the same thing. This is a video from Primetime Aquatics. This is a legit scientist. He teaches science for a living. He is a scientist. I'm just some dum dum on the internet, but I'm a well-researched dum-dum on the internet usually. The long and short of it is, most places, your tap water does not have a high enough level of chlorine, and in many cases chloramine as well, to where rinsing out your filtration media with tap water is going to kill all of your beneficial bacteria. You might kill off some of the weakest and oldest beneficial bacteria in the colony that populates all of that surface area. But the healthiest and most effective bacteria will be fine. So you might as well, whether you're using your hose outside of your house or you got a sink you don't mind getting dirty because you're going to clean it up afterward, whatever it may be, you might as well use tap water. If you have well water, you're in the same spot. Your well water's not going to have chlorine in it. Just use your tap water. Don't worry about doing crazy tank water stuff. You can. You can if you want to. But the biggest part that most people freak out about is their tap water. Now, if you know that you specifically have very high levels of something in your water, not to say anything negative about folks who have to deal with this as a natural condition of living, but places like Flint, Michigan, where the water is literally like toxic to drink, and you need to use other water, then okay, perfectly understandable to use old tank water during your water change to rinse out your media and clean your sponges. But in the end, you should be okay using tap water for most people. It's not going to kill off your colony, and if you really want to be paranoid about it after a really thorough rinsing, you could then add a little bit of whether it's the dechlorinator you get from Fritz, or it's Seachem Safe powder, or it's whatever ultimate, whichever version prime, pick your dechlorinator. Put a little dechlorinator in your tank. It'll be okay. Or put it straight in the filter. Right? Straight in the filter right after you've cleaned it, because most likely that water is circulating the system the fastest. You'll be okay. The second thing, a majority of your good bacterial colony is going to be inside your filter. But even if you so thoroughly clean that filter that you wiped out your entire bacterial colony, as long as you have substrate and plants, you have beneficial bacteria all over your tank. So even if you do wipe out that entire colony, there is a live colony inside the tank that will speed propagate your filter again and should be able to handle the things you need while that occurs. As long as the rest of your water parameters are okay, like you're keeping your KH all right, so you're not dealing with pH crashes, you're not having some kind of crazy ammonia spike because you're excessively feeding, whatever that might be, you are unlikely to deal with some crazy event cleaning your filter. Now, if you clean your filter media with bleach and you don't heavily dechlorinate it after rinsing it or something like that, or soak it in water with dechlorinator to make it safe, then okay, maybe then, but don't be 1950s grandma and clean your tank with bleach. We know better these days, right? We don't need to go that extreme. We mostly just need to get all the gunk and particulates out. We're not doing anything else because we're trying to actually keep that beneficial bacteria healthy. We're just trying to make sure the flow is there and we get all the gunk out. The next part, that's kind of a pseudo myth. If you let your filter get too clogged up with media, or with particulates from your waste, it will create some kind of excess horrible situation. This is kind of false. It is a potential yes if you were like really heavily feeding and you really gunked up stuff and you caused some kind of crazy bypass, or your filter just like was not pushing water at all because it's that clogged up. Maybe then you could have some negative impact to the overall health of your fish. However, as that bacterial process happens and breaks down all of those things that all your fish poo, all that stuff that's creating all that gunk in your filtration media, it inevitably becomes inert. Just like mulm that's sitting in your substrate will become inert. It's no longer producing ammonia and nitrite. And that process happens a lot faster than you might think. Now, that is really dependent on how healthy the bacterial colony is in your aquarium. And certainly, minimizing the buildup is good for your overall water quality because there's less random particulates that are going to float around in the water. You can keep your media cleaner so it can pick those particulates up. It'll make your tank look nicer. It won't look like this mess behind me, right? But you're not likely to encounter a scenario where all of that buildup of particulates creates some kind of like toxic bomb in your filter. Many of the reasons why people talk about you need to do maintenance this often, right? You need to throw away the cartridges in your filter. This is the biggest scam of all. Every couple weeks and putting brand new ones in. You got to get rid of all that waste. It's bad. If it's been sitting in your filter, it's inert. If you have a healthy bacterial colony, especially aerobic bacteria, because they're extremely efficient, and in a planet tank, it's inert. It is no longer something to worry about. Now, if you still see like strands of poo that have held shape in your substrate, maybe they're still giving a little bit off. But by the time it becomes that kind of fine, and you guys know what I'm talking about, that filter gravy, right? As we like to call it, where it's that fine particulates that you're squeezing out of your sponge, or you're rinsing out of your ceramic media, whatever it may be. It's inert at that point. The main reason why we are removing those things from our aquarium is to help keep the water looking nice. It's mostly a visual aesthetic. However, yes, removing those particulates helps ensure that the water stays clean, and more particulates that get produced by our fish waste, or excess food that doesn't get eaten and breaks down, or maybe you've got a plant that loses some leaves and they break down, and all that stuff gets pulled up, right? Pulling those particulates out and getting them locked into your filter media, especially sponges tend to be our big one, our mechanical filtration, right? Prevents it from sitting in the water column and looking ugly. And over time, if you get too much particulate matter in the water, yes, it could have a negative effect on your fish. However, most of us are doing our maintenance for the exact same reason that is just mentioned in chat. I notice the water flow's gone. Right? The water flow has just like gone way down to my filter. It's probably plugged up. I need to clean it. And most of us care about filter flow, right? We want that flow. Liquid Walker Chronics. Never heard the filter gravy term, huh? Yeah. That's you really want to like get a new tank ready? Just squeeze some filter gravy out of an old sponge in there. There's your real like kickstart for a biological bacteria colony. So now let's talk about the actual like timing and what we're doing and why it matters. Realistically, whenever we're cleaning our media, don't worry about the bacteria in your sponges unless you're using only sponges. Okay? If you have some kind of like ceramic media or some other biological media, right? That's housing a really large quantity of your beneficial bacteria. So if you're going to go that paranoid level, maybe you do have water that is in the kind of shape where you have to be careful for it. Use your old tank water and thoroughly rinse out all the gunk that could potentially clog up the pores of that biological media. So whether you got like ceramic rings or BioHome Ultimate, or one of my personal favorites, the Bright Water S. There's a million different medias out there, right? Maybe you've got plastic media, you're using bio balls, whatever the heck it may be. Give those a nice, good rinse. And honestly, it can be as simple as like taking your bag of media and just sitting there and shaking it in a bucket of clean water. It'll release all that stuff, help prevent it from getting clogged up, and you're good. On your sponges, you can rinse the heck out of those things. That's mostly mechanical filtration. We want that to just suck up those particulates and contain them. That helps make our tanks and our water look nice. Does it house beneficial bacteria? Absolutely. Sponges have massive surface area. But as long as you have a little bit of bacteria in other places in the aquarium, that sponge could have no bacteria whatsoever and it will repopulate. An example was filtering my awaze last night, or maintenancing my awaze last night. And I changed the sponges out completely. I finally got a side set of slightly smaller, so instead of the 60 ppi, I got the 40 ppi intake sponges. Or pre-filter sponges, excuse me, pre-filter, not intake. Because I want to try those out. Brand new sponges. All I did was barely rinse them to get them wet. Slapped them on there. Cleaned my old pre-filter sponges out. And then moved them to a place to let them slowly dry safely. I don't care about the beneficial bacteria sitting on those portions. I have all sorts of media and the rest of that canister that's doing the work for me. I have plants everywhere. They're carrying beneficial bacteria like crazy. It'll repopulate in a matter of a day or two. And it won't hinder the overall filtration of my tank. Don't stress about that stuff. Just like if you use intake sponges on your hang-on backs, you know, you're going like the method that folks like Corio preach, where you're kind of hot rodding your filter, right? Clean the heck out of those things. Don't stress about the biological bacteria sitting on that sponge. The rest of it is sitting in the rest of your canister or your hang-on back or whatever it may be. Now, in the case of sponge filters, where you're only using an air-powered sponge, if you have multiple, only clean one at a time. If you want to play the paranoid route. But if you're in an area like I am, most of the Midwest, I can think of very few places where your water is in a state that can actually be damaging to the beneficial bacteria colony, right? As far as the United States is concerned. Canada is probably very, very similar. They might even be better, to be honest. I can't speak for folks in Europe, but I'd have to think most of you have fairly good water. And they're not putting, like, pool levels of chlorine in your water. That's how much it would have to be, by the way. You'd have to have, like, the level of chlorine that's put in pools. And you know what I'm talking about, where, like, literally you can smell it. There's so much chlorine in the water. And you feel it on your skin. There's so much chlorine in the water. Yeah, there's, like, in chat right now, Sounds Pit Black just said, I changed from a Fluval 407 to a Marine Land Hob, and parameters have not changed at all. Very stable. Literally can change your entire filter out, because in your substrate and your plants, the rest, even the glass or acrylic surfaces, you will have beneficial bacteria just sitting there. They will repopulate those things. You don't have to stress. Now, if you're a completely bare bottom tank, nothing in it, and you're keeping something that has extremely high waste, like arowanas at full size, okay, you might need to take a little more careful pace. But you don't need to. To answer your question, the tech guy, Tapwire, why would you take the risk? There is none. That's science. I linked a video earlier. I'll link it again for you. Specifically for you. Here you go. Bam. That's from Primetime Aquatics. The man is literally a scientist. He's a, like a microbiologist, if I remember right. Biochemist, one of the two. Can't remember what Jason does for a living. But the man knows his stuff. He's done the actual, like, science behind it. There's not enough stuff in your tap water, with rare exceptions. There are certain places in the United States that may have it, but there's just not enough in there to kill off the healthiest beneficial bacteria in your filter. And that's the stuff that you want to keep. The old bacteria colonies, you don't want them. That's part of why, like, a moving bed filter is very effective when it finally gets kicking and going. Because all of that movement against each other, all that friction, helps remove all of the oldest and weakest bacteria colony portions and leaves only the healthiest, most effective ones. I understand you mean cleaning with tap water. That's specifically what I'm talking about. Unless you're like literally pool levels of chlorine, it's not going to kill off your bacteria colony in whatever you're rinsing out. Now, if you were to sit there and take your media and soak it and just leave it soaking for a long period of time, okay, maybe, but you're not doing that to clean your stuff. You're maybe rinsing something for 10 minutes. Even that is not enough time. It's not enough time for the minimal amount of chlorines that keep drinking water safe for humans to then kill off your bacterial colony. You actually need a surprisingly high concentration of chlorine to do that. They're very tough little creatures. Very tough. Let's get back on topic, though. So let's say you're doing all this, right? How often should you maintain your filter? That's up to you. Do you want to be that person who maintains a filter every other week? Do it. But realistically, maintenance comes down to this. When you start seeing your flow be impacted, that's the best time to clean it. Why? It usually means that inside your media, or in just your sponge if you're not using a powered filter, there is enough gunk that it's kind of clogged everything up. All you want to do is get rid of all the gunk. It's very simple. Now, if you put way too much like super fine media, like filter floss, or you get like filter batting or something like that, you're going to probably clog your filter up super fast. Now, if you're using something like an intake sponge on a powered filter, you could easily do a quick cleaning once a week if you wanted to. Liquid Rock Aquatics. I clean my pre-filters when they start to hourglass versus Kevin Rosberg. Intake sponge once every 7 days. Once they start to hourglass, that means that they're so full that the water flow in the power filter literally is sucking everything in because not enough water can move through, right? And frequently, that's when I do mine, right? Because as long as flow is going okay, you really don't need to clean it. All of that gunk and stuff becomes inert surprisingly quickly. The beneficial bacteria does impressive work in your aquarium once it has completed the nitrogen cycle. Now, sponge filters are a little different. An air-powered sponge like this guy that I've got in my Flex now because my Flex pump died, you're not going to see a difference in flow. So what do you look for? Look at the physical sponge. Do you see, is your black sponge now kind of brown because it's got so much gunk in it? It's time to clean it. Or set yourself a regular cadence. If you have a lightly stocked tank, you probably just want to squeeze that thing out once every 2 months. If you have a more heavily stocked tank with multiple sponges, you probably want to clean one sponge every 2 weeks. Or roughly, each sponge is getting cleaned monthly. With sponges, it's fast. It's 5 to 10 minutes of work, right? Especially if you're in a place where you can just use tap water and you don't have to keep changing your water over and over again. You can just work at it. Easy peasy. It's fast. Like I said, I did my full day of work last night. I had dinner with my lady and brother-in-law James. Spent a little time with Papa Limo. Then before coming upstairs to Shantoto and doing some kind of other stuff, I spent an hour. I serviced 5 filters. And 2 of them were way overdue. But I've been too busy for my own good. right? You can service a number of filters really, really fast if you're not afraid to use tap water. It's pretty simple. Greg Jones, man, it's good to by the way, Greg. It's good to see you back, kind of active again. It's been nice to see you every once in a while. Uh, man, you were in whose stream were you in the other day? You were in, was it Prime Time? I feel bad because I saw that you were specifically in a stream and they mentioned your name out. I was very happy to see like you kind of got started getting a little more active again. But Greg saying like K1 microfluidized beds are the best biofilters, self cleaning, haven't cleaned the media in 10 years. I disagree. Can I be inflammatory with you, Greg? We'd have a little fun. You want to know what the best biofilter is? Plants. As far as like what we use as supplemental filtration, I'd agree. If you have the system, because most of the time you need a larger system, right, to get a good fluidized bed. And if you're dealing with very heavy bioloads, they're very impressive. Do not get me wrong, because you don't have to do a lot of maintenance. But I would say you could do the same thing in a good sump as long as you plan it correctly without needing a fluidized bed, right? Because if as long as you catch all the particulates with really good filter media in the right places in your sump, like really good micron socks or something like that, and you change them regularly, you can get some insane volume of media in most sumps. Now, granted, fluidized bed almost always is in a style of sump, right? So really, it's just personal preference. I would say if you're doing super high, like your monster fish and stuff like that, you got really high bioloads, and you can do it correctly, fluidized beds are very, very effective. But for me personally, especially if you want really, really oxygenated water, that's another good one too, right? Because you need all that extra oxygen to move your fluidized bed. It's great for that. Me personally, I like a method kind of like if you've ever seen Corvus Oskin sumps where there's like this filter batting basically between every layer and that picks up all your particulates on top of a few other things. That's more the style I like because I like to be able to use parts of my sump if I want to as either places to stash other plants, usually, or fish if you had to. So, like, I could have a big rainbow fish tank, and in my sump, I could keep a colony of shrimp. Because I certainly can't keep those shrimp with a rainbow fish. They're going to eat them like crazy. Stupid rainbows. Won't let me keep shrimp. Let's be fair, I just can't keep shrimp. I'm terrible at it. Okay. So, in the end, here's the biggest thing, the main thing you need to know about filter maintenance, the final lesson. The minimum amount of maintenance you should do is, in the case of sponge filters, if looking at the sponge, you can see it is physically full of tons of detritus. That's when you need to clean it. In the case of hang-on backs and canisters, are you starting to get significant impact to your water flow rate? It is time to clean the filter. Now, for those of you who are less lazy, or maybe, just maybe, you want to go above and beyond and keep the optimal water quality you possibly can. In general, if you can service your filters once a month, that is sufficient. If you use things like intake sponges or pre-filters, you can cut the maintenance down on the main unit if you service that intake sponge or pre-filter regularly. 503 Aquatics. Also another one. If your water starts smelling bad, it is probably time to do some cleaning maintenance on your tank. Clean your filter, do a little gravel vacuuming. It's time. If you have that aquarium smell, it's time to clean some stuff. Easy peasy. Don't be afraid of using your tap water. With rare exception, almost all tap water in most of North America, you're okay. A Google mandated name. If my water is brown and foaming and all of my fish are dead, should I clean my filter? It's probably too late. You should have cleaned it a little bit before. I like your snark, sir. Now here's a great one. And to finish that out, if you have only one tank and you're going crazy on it, you are the chairman of my horticulture awards program, the guy who's got this nice discus tank who has 3 Fluval 407s on 100-gallon tank. He cleans one every week. So that means each 407 is cleaned every 3 weeks, and they're done in rotation. If you have one tank and you want to go crazy, you can go to that level of maintenance. And you can have the most amazing water quality. Or you can set yourself a reasonable schedule to where it's not too oppressive to your time, and you'll be okay. Once a month is fantastic. If you have lots of tanks, then I suggest using filtration that doesn't take very much time to service. Sponges are a great example. Or if you do have powered filters, have something that is like the Tidal or the Fluval, where it is relatively fast to access the media, get it cleaned, and get it back in there. And you'll be okay. Now, if you're a psycho and you don't service your filter but once a year, you better have other things running in that tank to keep water movement going, to keep oxygenation going, and hopefully you have some plants to do a lot of your actual heavy lifting for you. Because otherwise, that's when you might actually run into real problems. That's really all you need to know about filter maintenance. You will be okay. You'll be okay. I'll never have discus. They do love that clean water. You know, it's interesting. I have from several friends that have been big discus keepers. They have found that the wild caught discus are more capable of handling like less insane water quality than some of the line bred ones. Very interesting. Very interesting. All right, we're gonna slam through some questions, guys. We'll go to usual Q&A. So at Bentley Pasco, this was a little bit longer one, I know, but filtration does that. Chat, thank you for participating. It was very fun. Greg, I hope I didn't scare you off. Leo 209. So when I clean my filters, I do the media and the sponge in it once a month. I do clean my pre-filter every week though, and do a weekly water change. Yeah, dude, that's awesome. If you're doing that level of maintenance, that's fantastic. That's like, I would say, optimal. Because you have pre-filters, so you're doing those regularly, you're keeping them nice and clean so that the minimal particulates are getting into the actual like rest of your media. And then even then, you're still doing monthly maintenance on the rest of it. That's fantastic. Christopher Howard, hey Bentley, hello from everyone from the UK. So everyone gets one plant, one fish into their nuclear bunker because that clown hit Poland. How depressing. Oh yeah, let's not talk about Comrade Putin, shall we? Fucking yeah. That guy. One day I'm upgrading to a rotary drum filter so I can say I'm a boss. Dude, I know a guy who's got 2 of those on his my buddy Rogue Aquariums. He's got 2 of them on his big like 600-gallon reef tank. God, I can't remember who makes it, but that you're talking about the ones that have the big rotary like cloth media, basically, on top of all the other things. Those things are wild. I just can't like fathom paying that much money for a unit like that because they're not cheap. They're so expensive. Oh Lord. Oh, Lord. Okay, I'm gonna backwards and chat a little bit. I know I had some questions. I'll try and get to them. If I miss some, feel free to repost them, guys. I'll try my best to get to them. Also, yes, lots of people have said hi. Good to see you all. Good to see you all. I know I don't call out that many people, but you know, want to see some like ghosts of YouTube past, if you will. It's nice to say hi every once in a while. I feel like if Jeff Rose Fish Keeping showed up, I would say hi to Jeff Rose because I haven't seen him regularly in a while. Moby Dick of Dopeness. What a name. I once let my Rena XP3 run for almost 4 years between cleanings. Stocking was low. Flow took a long time to slow down. Yeah, I mean, Renas are like old Rena XP3s are built like freight trains. They're so tough. There was a question actually about flow, whether I like high or low flow. Um, it depends on the filter, and it depends on the fish I'm keeping. Like if I'm doing plecos, I tend to have a much higher rate of flow. Rainbows also, most rainbows like flow. So typically with rainbows, I'll try to have higher flow rates, but it's not required. Low flow is perfectly fine. It's kind of what it comes down to, I think, is how much water movement do you want in your tank, and how much are you trying to polish the water? Because the higher flow rate's going to have more turnover, and in theory will give you slightly better water polishing in the end. All right. Make sure. Paul Sotero, the fry in one of the Episto tanks feed on the sponge filter. A bunch of things will feed. Like if you've got matin filters and things like that, that's another one. The one I didn't cover is matin filters. They actually kind of almost deserve their own category because matin filters, the way they're designed, you basically don't have to service them very often at all. Like, especially if you're doing like shrimp or something else that is like relatively low bio load and doesn't create that much mess, you you so rarely need to clean those things. It's kind of crazy about like how fantastic those particular filters are in the right case. Just because they're almost like a set it and forget it. You could probably in a shrimp tank only clean your matin filter like once a year because the shrimp will just sit there and feed on all the stuff in it too. It's very interesting to me. But if you were doing like rainbow fish or something, you probably want to do a little more often. Once every 3 months, be pretty great. depends on how much. Just depends on how much food you're throwing in. If you got like 100 babies on the corner matin filter in a 40-gallon breeder, you probably need to service it slightly more often. But even then, not much. Geek Boy, I cleaned one Fluval 306 on my 90 back, and I think it was January. I mean, I have an FX6 I haven't serviced in 2 years. I need to service it. It's going to be ugly. That thing's going to be... Woo! It's going to be packed full of gunk. But that thing's going on like a champ, dude. It's a FX6 I bought used 5.5 years ago now. Dude, that thing is just a beast. And it had been in use for, I think she said she'd had it for 3 years before I bought it. And it's just like, nah, it'll be fine. It's just so tough. There we go. There's an interesting one. Garden meter. Every 3 years for most of the shrimp tanks when it comes to service. Or I think that's at least what we're going for. Maybe I'm wrong. Feel free to correct me. It's pretty wild, though. Planted goldies. Bentley, what is the rarest rainbow fish? Can you keep a single rainbow fish as a centerpiece fish? Can you? Yes. But you won't see optimal behavior or color. Rainbow fish are inherently schooling, shoaling fish. They really like to be in groups. That's part of the big appeal to rainbow fish, not only their color, but the fact that they're a peaceful schooler. So you can get big groups of them in with even much smaller fish like white clouds and tetras and things like that, and they'll coexist just fine. The biggest thing with rainbows is they're so fast and like use their body size to their advantage when it comes to getting at food. Some of your shyer small fish might not be able to get to food very easy. So you do have to like be aware of the rainbow fish and how they feed when you're trying to feed all of your fish to make sure that like your littler guys or your shyer fish are getting their fair share of food too. That's easy to do. Rainbows are dumb. You put food on one side of the tank and they'll come rushing over, then you put food on the other side of the tank for the other fish. Or find where they're hiding and drop food over there, right? Easy peasy. But you do have to account for it. It's important. As far as the rarest rainbow fish, I mean, I guess you would have to like say technically it'd be one of the species that's extinct at this point, and we don't have anything in the hobby. But the current, probably the rarest rainbow fish right now is the Clausioensis, because it's not as popular as like the Tawa or the Myrisai, so it's not seeing as much breeding. But the last time that it was caught in the wild, which is I think the only time we've brought it into the hobby, they found it in a ditch near the water system where they thought it was supposed to be because of some flooding, and not in the actual like basically 150-foot area uh, that it's normally in. So the Clausioensis is in a water system that is for the most part subterranean, underground. Think like the Devil's Hole pupfish if you're familiar with that. And there's only a small portion of it that actually comes up to the surface and meets oxygen, and it's in that little pool area basically that this rainbow fish exists in nature. The last time they went to see it, they didn't find any in that pool. They found them in a ditch nearby. So most likely they're extinct in the wild, and there are some in the hobby, but not very many. Similarly, you could apply this to like the Malanda rainbow fish, whether it's Wallace Road or Williams Creek. They're the same fish, by the way, but just there's a couple different names depending on who you get it from. Or the Running River rainbow fish is kind of similar in the sense that these were near extinction because people had introduced other rainbow fish there and they started hybridizing. So a group of scientists like literally saved them from extinction and had to move them to a different location in order to keep them surviving and going. But they're probably not as rare as like Clausioensis or True Centaniensis are really hard to get a hold of. They're only recently getting some actually properly coming in through Marcel, and he got them out of the group in Europe. But other than that, like the real ones are so hard to find, and often they're either hybridized or they're some kind of fasciata and not true Centaniensis. So that's another one that's like super rare. I don't know. You could argue that almost all rainbow fish are rare because, unfortunately, most of their habitats are being destroyed. Whether it's illegal gold farming, mining, farming, fine, palm farming, so palm oil farming using palm trees and things like that, where they're just destroying a lot of the natural systems around there, and chemicals get in the water system and kill everything in them in order to produce things that, honestly, most first world countries are buying in bulk and in large economic advantage compared to what those small countries need. Now, the rainbows that come from Australia are a little bit better off. But even then, if you were to go that route, there's still some there that are relatively rare. And the Malanda and the Running River are probably the best examples. But some of the pseudomagills are in a similar shape where they're so difficult to breed in captivity that there's really not a ton of them. What's known as like the honey blue eye, most commonly, is a great example. I know that the fish community, Maria Z, recently got some with with my help. I put her in contact with the right people to get some. They're notoriously difficult to breed. Even like Gary Lang just gave up trying to breed them because they were such a pain in the butt. But thankfully, she's been able to have success so far. But yeah, just it's kind of crazy when it gets to rainbows. There's just so many things that go wild with them. Bears faces. Can a JCMP light grow a proper high-tech carpet with CO2? I would say in shallower tanks, absolutely. Anything that's like a 40 breeder or shallower in its height, you're probably fine. Those JCMP lights and the like Higer, there's a Higer equivalent and a few others now. They're all way more powerful than they probably need to be. So keep that in mind. But one thing that I will note is I haven't kept a singular JCMP light on the entire time of the newer versions. I've got one of the older versions that's been going for quite a while, for like over a year straight. So I don't know if they're going to dim over time. From what I've seen in the previous version of the light, it really doesn't, the amount of dim compared to when I first got it is really minimal. We're talking like, what was 100% is probably now more like 95%. So that's not bad. But over time, those cheaper built lights do tend to dim. Hopefully, it's similar where it's not that much. But I haven't had one sitting running for a long period of time because the tank that I typically test things on, I've cycled through a bunch of stuff. Yeah. I hope that helps. I think so. Like, I suppose that the final question would be, what are you trying to carpet with? Are you trying to carpet like dwarf baby tears, or are you trying to carpet Monte Carlo? Monte Carlo or Japan Clover are a lot easier than dwarf baby tears. Dwarf baby tears is notorious for being a pain in the butt, requiring like ultra high light and lots of CO2 to do well. Where Monte Carlo is not quite as finicky. So it kind of depends on what you're trying to carpet with too. Dwarf hairgrass might be okay as well. Just a thought there. Woo! Oh, okay. Greg's talking about like the actual proper rotary drum and not the roller mats. Well, all right, Mister Moneybags. Robert Johnson, Bentley, my rainbows hatched Sunday night, and like you said, they're microscopic. How can I know they're eating the powdered food I'm adding? Are they still alive? Then they're eating it. Here's the thing: rainbows basically have like no yolk sac. One thing to keep in note: you will want to feed them like 3 times a day, in a teeny tiny amount. The way that I used to do this when I was raising rainbows is I would go get myself like a cheap little hobby paintbrush, like a little like size 1 at a hobby store for doing like acrylic painting or like watercolor paintbrush. And you just dab the tip of it into your powdered food. You're going to like tap twice on the container to knock all the excess off. And you should be able to just barely like tap it, and you should see a fine mist of food come out that just creates like a thin film that's probably only about like yay wide in your tank. Not a lot. And it's going to slowly spread out over time, don't get me wrong. But what you want is lots of little feedings are really good for ensuring that the likelihood of success with baby rainbows. Because they have like basically no yolk sac, you have to feed them almost right away. And if they last 3-4 days, you know they're eating. If for some reason they're not eating a powdered food, then you might need to look into something like vinegar eels or infusoria paramecium or some other like similar super tiny food. But for the most part, they'll eat dang near anything as long as it sits basically at the surface. Rainbows, when they first hatch, for the most part, not all of them, but for the most part, live in that first like basically 3/4 to an inch of water for their first like week or two. And so if anything goes, any of your food goes below that portion of water, they're not going to get to it. They're only going to get the at the very, very top of the water is the only place they're looking for food. So if you're 3-4 days in and they're still going, you're doing okay. But you might want to look at multiple feedings per day in very tiny amounts, right? Like I said, take a little paintbrush. It's like your best friend. I've got a video actually that goes over like feeding baby rainbows, and I've actually shown like that process. Let me see if I can hunt it down real fast. Let's see if I can find mine. Aha! No, that's an older one. Where's my good one? Jeez. This is probably still relatively accurate. It's not as good as the paintbrush method, but it is pretty effective. This was from like way back when I used to use my cell phone all ghetto like to do my videos. But there's that right there. The paintbrush method is way more effective. I would use that if you can. Liquid rock Quadex Bentley. I don't know if you saw, but the flex pump has an internal filter that gets plugged up. Yeah, I've cleaned that a few times. My pump is like dead. It's not moving any water at all. So it's okay. I'm not that stressed. Honestly, this tank is not that long for this world. After a few more tanks get torn down and set up, this is probably like the next one. I'll probably eventually have a different fish tank in here. I might go bigger, honestly. As psychotic as that sounds, but I would like to be able to keep a small colony of some kind of rainbows, and just like something the size of the flex doesn't do that very well. So like smaller rainbows, definitely something more like Reading River size or smaller. I might try to get like Ewers again if I can and keep those in my room. But they might end up in a different place. There's a lot of stuff happening. This will be here still for probably a couple of months, but after I get a few other things done, the next thing is tearing this bad boy down. Oh man, I'm so behind chat. I'm sorry. There was a question about CO2 diffusers. So there's lots of options. CO2 Art has some good ones. Nylock G makes some good ones. The Aquarium Co-op, their Neo diffuser is decent if you're using smaller tanks. I personally prefer atomic diffusers, which, if you're going for in the tank, inline diffusers if you can. Inline diffusers are always the best. You're going to get the best diffusion of CO2 into your water. You're going to all the things. They're the best that you can get, but not everybody is set up to use an inline CO2 reactor of some form. So if you're going to do that, like I generally like the atomic diffusers. Are a lot more expensive, but they get a really fine mist of bubbles, and they have a much better absorption rate into the water than some of the other diffusers out there. The Neo diffuser style and all those like glass ones that have little ceramic plate in them, basically, they'll do very, very well. An air stone is not sufficient. Just don't do that. But for the most part, any of your nicer built ones, when it comes to like those Neo style diffusers, the glass ones, anything that's going to cost you somewhere between $15 and $25 is probably sufficient quality, especially if it's a brand you've heard of. You know, if it's like Jim Bob's CO2 Shack, yeah, maybe not trust it so much, but it's like Nylock G, well, they make all sorts of stuff for aquariums nowadays. You know, if you get something from Higer, it's made by some random company in China, but they also probably make stuff for like 7 other companies, so it's probably a decent product. You know, a lot of stuff like that, right? It's just kind of pick your poison. I will spend the extra money to get a really, really nice diffuser from either like GLA, CO2 Art, or Nylock G. I tried all 3; they're all nice. Rather than like save some money and do something, it's a like cheaper solution. You could really go if you want to do like passive CO2 and get like one of the like passive CO2 containers where you like fill the thing up with CO2, and then as the water is sitting there touching it, just slowly diffuses more and more, and the water goes up, and then you refill them. People can do that with like really a Gatorade bottle. But if you want just like a standard diffuser with a line going to it and all that kind of thing, you got a lot of options out there. Most of them are great. Very few of them are bad. If it's plastic, if it's like the black plastic, like Fluval has one, it's like black plastic with a little ring on it. It's one of the worst products they make. Those things suck. Don't use them. At a very minimum, get one of the ones that's glass that has the nice, like very fine ceramic in it, or like I said, atomic diffusers, inline reactors, all those kind of things. That's your best bets. There's also a question about like filtration for a 55 gallon. You could honestly do a couple of sponge filters and be okay. It depends on what you're trying to put in there. If you want a more powered filter, you can look at something like the Owaze 350, the Fluval 307 or 407. You could go crazy and put an FX4 on that thing. You don't need to. You don't need to go that crazy. For hang-on backs, if you want something more of that range, I would say either there's a lot of options. Like honestly, even like the Marineland Penguin filters are a good filter. But what I would say is if a filter says it handles up to 50 gallons, go the next size up. So in that case, instead of like an AquaClear 50, you would want to use at least an AquaClear 70, maybe 2 of them. If a Tidal 55 is like up to 55, no. Get a Tidal 75. Just do that little upgrade and then damper the flow down if you need to. Don't go with a filter that like it says its max is basically the size of your tank, because as it starts to plug up or whatever, for whatever reason, you can't kind of push up without replacing that piece of hardware. Or if you get one that's larger, you can usually bring the flow down, and you're better off going that road. Like I put AquaClear 110s and Tidal 110s on 40-gallon breeders. I just turn the flow down a little bit. Or in some cases, I keep the flow at max because I've got fish that like that level of flow. Most fish can handle almost any kind of flow we're putting at them for most of your powered filters. Usually none of them are so powerful that it's actually creating a lot. And it does depend. Like, you don't want to put a super high power filter with a betta, right? They're not going to like that. But if you're doing like tetras and angelfish or rainbow fish, plecos, you're fine. So it comes down to what kind of fish and how many you're putting in there. Wait, are there any really beautiful rainbow fish hybrids that were intentionally bred by humans? I am inherently against hybrid rainbows. Inherently. Why hybridize something where there's so much natural color diversity? You don't need it. There are a couple of common hybrids in the hobby. The Marcy rainbow, for example, the Marcy rainbow is a hybrid between a Parkinsoni and another fish. They look okay. I think there are much better looking rainbow fish out there that are natural breeds. There's a like IRG fasciata that me and a few of my rainbow fish buddies are pretty confident is actually a hybrid. It's a beautiful fish, but it's a hybrid. We're fairly confident. We're so confident we don't want to breed them. It's my 2 cents. Why go for a hybrid when there is already so much color, body shape, diversity out there in rainbows as is? You don't need it. Kingfisher's Catch. What bow is on the Bentley Pasco wish list for Santa this year? None of them, actually. I know, right? Most of like the new tanks I would be setting up, I probably won't have ready for fish by Christmas. They'll be set up, but not ready for fish. And if there is a fish that I'm going to pick up fast, it's probably something I already have, or it would be a not rainbow fish. So in that case, we're talking about a species of pleco. Or maybe shrimp, who knows? Realistically, actually, the most likely fish I am to get before Christmas, if anything, is coolie loaches. But that's for my lady. So, yeah. We'll see how that all handles out. I'm gonna jump ahead a little bit, chat. Sorry, I know I'm way behind and we're already at time, but I want to get like one more question. Or maybe two. Leo209, what's your opinion on how often to clean the sponges on a hob with a pre-filter in it? Monthly or longer or sooner? Dude, I think the amount of maintenance you're doing is great. If you want to do slightly less, I would argue that it's all about eyeballing things and understanding like your fish bioload versus what's going to start plugging things up. And that's more of an eyeball thing. Like somebody asked earlier what my maintenance schedule was, and that's a great question. My maintenance schedule is all by eye. I literally pay attention to what things look like, what my flow looks like, and that tells me when it's time to service things. With the exception of tanks that don't have a lot of plants. I keep plants in so many tanks that usually the water quality is just fine, and I care more about flow rate than anything else. So I'm watching flow rate in most of my powered filters, and when I see it get down too low, with the exception of the retirement tank, that's the one where I'm kind of lazy about it, that's when I start doing service. And sometimes it's my schedule. Sometimes my schedule is just like such a nightmare that I have to put stuff off. But I try to be pretty regular, which is to say, I try to use pre-filter sponges wherever I can so that I can clean the pre-filters more often and not have to service the entire filter as regular. But realistically, somewhere between, I don't super stock most of my tanks, so a lot of my filters will go 3 to 6 months without service outside of a pre-filter. And pre-filters typically get serviced once a month. That should help. Tank with 8 L184, 6 Cardinal Tetra shrimp. I would service way more frequently in the case of the 184s, just because they're pretty messy. Right, they're plecos. They make a lot of mess. They're not as bad as some of the Ancestris, right? Being hype Ancestris, right? Leopard frog plecos. They're meat eaters. They don't make quite as much mess, but still, those are fish that really benefit from super high water quality. So are those type of the shrimp, any kind of shrimp, right? That's what you're looking at. This is another great tip from Kelly. Here's a tip: in a mature tank, if algae is popping up, clean your filter. That's another good one. Last question I want to handle for the night. Or maybe I can handle two. Really fast one. Wei Wang. Are rainbow fish hybrids sterile? Sometimes, but not always. There's a number that are not sterile, but there are some that end up being sterile. Usually it's when they cross genus. So if a Chalatharina and a Melanitania crossbreed, those are usually sterile. But if they're both Melanitanias, usually they are not sterile. Does that make sense? So when you cross the genus, typically that's when they become sterile. When they're the same genus, that's usually when they can still keep making more babies, and that's a problem, right? That's what impacted like the Running River rainbow fishes. They were both Melanitanias. So the hybrids that were being born were not sterile. So they could keep hybridizing and eventually wipe out the original population. But that's actually a really great question about rainbows and what you could keep together and worry about things. There's one last question I wanted to do. Hold on. I think it's from Kingfisher Sketch. Where'd it go? Hi, Chibi Faith. For those that don't know, Chibi Faith is my significant other. My lady. She's been streaming on the Twitch, and that's her like Twitch name. So she's got a YouTube channel that is under that name where she posts some like highlight videos and stuff. So if you want to see like what my lady does gaming wise with her YouTuber and stuff, that would be the channel you can go check out. I think I posted one video in the community tab. I might post another one here soon. She has a lot of silly fun. It's enjoyable if you're a nerd. Oh, this is the last one. Aquatic Highs. Lake Tanganyika has a nitrate level of 5 to 10, and algae takes care of it. Not just algae, actually. There's, and the reason, it's not really a question, but I do want to add some stuff to this. There are also native big quotation marks, Vallisneria species in Lake Tanganyika. So portions of Lake Tang have a species of val that has naturally gotten used to the very high pH. I have a local club member who regularly sells high pH val that came directly from Lake Tang, where one of his friends who goes to Lake Tang almost every year or two and does some like wild catching and surveying fish and footage and all that kind of stuff. Folks are like Pam Chin and those kind of odd conning, all these like super African cichlid, like super gurus, those kind of people, right? Brought him back some Vallisneria direct from Lake Tang. And he's been propagating it ever since. So he has a lot of this like high pH val, as we like to call it, to let you know like this stuff came from Lake Tang and it tolerates very high pH levels. It's pretty sweet. But yes, most of it is algae, and a lot of the fish in there, that's why there's so many algae eating fish in Lake Tang, where their natural diet is heavy in algae. It's very interesting. Like there's so much. We usually think of cichlids as these very aggressive predatory fish, but then you look at some of like the African Rift lakes where there's significant numbers of algae scraping fish, and their jaws have evolved to pick up certain things off certain surfaces. It's fascinating how like diverse the cichlid population in general is. Despite the fact that I'm not a cichlid nerd, I find that kind of like sciencey stuff when I can get that in good presentations of things. Love it. Do you guys eat before, during, or after Bentley stream? Usually I eat after my stream. Anyway. And Kelly is giving proper scientific information. The reason why the two genuses cannot become sterile is because Chalatharina and Melanitania have a different number of chromosomes. What about Glossolepis? Huh? Didn't include them. Nobody ever thinks of glossos. But yeah, that's usually where that case occurs. Now you know the actual scientific reason why, instead of just like the dumb answer why. Anyway, gang, thank you so much for coming out tonight. I really appreciate it as we're getting into the fun cold time weather and times have changed, so it's all wonky and weird. I appreciate you guys. I hope you had an entertainment time talking about filter maintenance, and I hope you now know everything you've ever needed to know about servicing your filter. As always, guys, thank you so much for watching, and stay awesome. Also, to all of you who won towels, they should be shipping out this Saturday. I got too busy this weekend. I meant to ship them out this weekend, but